Hello, it's me and welcome to my channel. In this video, we'll explore what life was like for women during ancient Egypt, from the status of women to female rulers such as Hatshepsut and Cleopatra. There are no words to describe how excited I am for this video because I have wanted to make it for so long now. Let's dive right into it. Women's status in Egyptian society. The status of women in ancient Egypt is often thought to have been superior to that of other contemporary civilizations, including those in Mesopotamia and Greece. This notion is sometimes used to contrast with the more subjugated position of women in later Islamic Egyptian society. The truth is that the status of women fluctuated over the span of the ancient Egyptian civilization, which lasted for over 3,000 years, going from New Kingdom all the way to Roman Egypt, and also it varied greatly depending on social class. Upper Egypt had its own customs and traditions, which differed somewhat from those of Lower Egypt, but for the sake of simplicity, I will focus on the Old Kingdom, which most historians agree was the golden age of ancient Egypt. Upper-class women could own and manage property, including businesses such as restaurants and brothels. They could also engage in legal proceedings, including serving as witnesses in court. In fact, they could take their husbands to court if they did something wrong, like having an affair. Also, women could participate in religious activities, including serving as priestesses. Women's lives were not easy, however, and they were expected to be subservient to their husbands and fathers. Marrying outside one's social class was forbidden, and women were killed if they were found guilty of adultery. Female rulers. Egypt had several female rulers, although it was predominantly ruled by male pharaohs. The most famous female ruler was probably Cleopatra, who was known for her intelligence and political skills. However, there were several other notable female rulers before her, including Hatshepsut. Hatshepsut was a female pharaoh of Egypt from the 18th dynasty, who reigned from about 1478 to 1458 BC. She is considered to be one of the most successful pharaohs in Egyptian history, as she oversaw a period of peace and prosperity. Hatshepsut's legacy, however, was somewhat controversial, as many of the records of her reign were destroyed by her successor, Thutmose III, who was either her stepson or her son, depending on which theory you follow. It has been speculated that he tried to erase her memory out of a desire to legitimize his claim to the throne or to cast himself as the sole pharaoh. But unlike Cleopatra, whose story was written by Romans and became part of the mainstream historical narrative, most of what we know about Hatshepsut comes from the records that were left by her own court. Most of these records were destroyed, but luckily some survived and show us that she liked to present herself as a male pharaoh. She wore traditional male attire, including a fake beard, and used male titles such as his beloved son. Despite her efforts to portray herself as a man, however, Hatshepsut was undoubtedly a woman, and she even gave birth to a daughter while in office. Her ability to hold the highest position in Egyptian society demonstrates the high status of women in Egyptian culture. During her reign, she successfully completed an expedition to the land of Punt, a mysterious place located in the Arabian Sea. Historians believe that it might have been Somalia or Ethiopia, but no one knows for sure. Daily life for women. The daily life of a woman in ancient Egypt varied greatly depending on her social class. The life of a middle-class or upper-class woman would have been very different from that of a poor woman. For example, upper-class women might have lived in luxury and had access to things like servants, while poor women would have been much more likely to work long hours in the fields. In addition, women of higher social status were more likely to be literate and educated. This would have allowed them to participate in intellectual and cultural life and to hold positions of power and influence. Poor women, on the other hand, would have had little access to education and would have been more likely to be seen as property than as individuals with rights and freedoms. Regardless of their social class, however, all women in ancient Egypt were expected to perform certain roles and duties. They were responsible for bearing children, managing the household, and providing goods and services for the family. Women were also expected to be subservient to men and to obey their husbands, fathers, and brothers. Despite these constraints, women in ancient Egypt were able to achieve a great deal. They were able to participate in religious and cultural life, and they were able to hold positions of power and influence. Women were also able to contribute to the economy and to hold property. Middle-class women. Middle-class women in ancient Egypt had a slightly better life than lower-class women. They were more likely to be literate and educated, and they were more likely to be able to participate in intellectual and cultural life. They were also more likely to be able to hold positions of power and influence. Middle-class women were still expected to perform domestic duties, however, and they were still expected to be subservient to men. Lower-class women. Lower-class women in ancient Egypt had a difficult life. They were often forced to work long hours in the fields, and they were more likely to be illiterate and uneducated. They were also more likely to be treated as property and less likely to be seen as individuals with rights and freedoms. Despite these challenges, however, lower-class women were still able to make contributions to society and to hold property. They were also able to participate in religious and cultural life to a limited extent. Women in the workforce. Women in ancient Egypt participated in the workforce in a variety of ways. They worked as farmers, artisans, merchants, and domestic servants. Women were also employed in the fields, where they grew crops such as wheat, barley, and flax. They also worked as weavers, spinners, and dyers. Women were also involved in the fishing industry, where they helped to catch and process fish. Women were also employed as musicians, dancers, and entertainers. They performed at festivals and other special events. Women were also employed as priestesses, where they served in the temples and took care of the gods and goddesses. Women were also employed as midwives, where they assisted with childbirth. They were also involved in the mummification process, where they prepared the bodies of the dead for burial. Conclusion: overall, women in ancient Egypt had a complex and often challenging life. They faced many restrictions and were often seen as second-class citizens. However, they were also able to make important contributions to society and to hold property. They were also able to participate in religious and cultural life to a limited extent. Women in ancient Egypt were also able to achieve some positions of power and influence, such as that of queen or priestess. Overall, the life of a woman in ancient Egypt was shaped by her social class and the expectations of the time period in which she lived. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please like, comment, and share. I'd love to hear your thoughts on ancient Egypt. What are your favorite things about it? What do you want to learn more about? And if you haven't already, please subscribe to get more videos like this one. Thank you again for watching, and I'll see you next time.